Thomas was a 10-year-old boy when his father was killed in an accident. His life changed irrevocably in an instant. Not long ago, he was an ordinary boy who laughed every day, played with his friends, and planned his future. His father was a hero to him, the one who supported, advised, and was a pillar of strength in any situation. He was not only a dad, but also a true friend. But after the tragedy, this world collapsed, leaving Thomas with a feeling of emptiness and deep loss. The first few months after his father's death were a real shock for Thomas. He couldn't believe that he would never see him again, that he would never hear his voice again, that he would never feel the warmth he always gave. It was hard to accept, and Thomas simply didn't know how to continue living. The world he knew no longer existed, and he didn't understand how to continue living in this new world where his father was no longer there. His emotions became chaotic. He couldn't find a way to cope with them. At first, Thomas felt angry. Anger at his father being taken so suddenly, anger at the world that kept moving on while his own life became locked in uncertainty and despair. This anger manifested itself in all his interactions with people. He could no longer communicate normally with his friends, and his relationship with his mother also deteriorated. He felt lonely and didn't know how to ask for help. Thomas began to withdraw into himself. He avoided socializing with friends, didn't want to participate in activities that once brought him joy. He stopped having fun, became emotionless and withdrawn. His heart was heavy and his thoughts were dark. Pain became a constant companion in his life, and Thomas didn't know how to cope. His world became small and gloomy, with no room for joy or hope. However, Marta, his mother, was no less worried than her son. She was deeply concerned about his changes. She saw how his life gradually lost meaning, how he destroyed himself, isolating himself from the whole world. She wanted to help him, but she did not know how. She tried to talk to him, to understand him, to support him, but everything was in vain. He pushed her away, silently locked himself in his room, or simply threw cold and angry answers. After a while, Marta realized that she needed help for her son, and made an appointment with a psychologist. This was a decision that was the beginning of changes, although with great doubt on the part of Thomas himself. After several sessions with a psychologist, Thomas began to change his attitude towards life. The psychologist helped him understand that pain and anger are normal emotions that need to be experienced, not avoided. She taught him to work with his emotions, not let them control his life. However, this was only the first step towards change. Thomas realized that he needed to do something to get his emotions out of the trap he was in. And then the idea of taking up sports arose. At first, it was not something he would devote himself to. Sports were just a way for him to get rid of the negative emotions that were accumulating inside. He did not expect great results from it, but he understood that at least it could help him relieve stress and get out of the vicious circle. The first workouts were difficult. Thomas was not a sports person, and the beginning was difficult. He felt pain, shame, doubts, but he could not stop. Each workout was difficult, but over time he noticed how his body began to change. At first, he started training to distract himself from thoughts about his father, but over time he realized that physical exercise became for him not just physical activity, but real therapy. The purpose of this video is to show how sports help not only to recover physically, but also emotionally. Although Thomas initially didn't see much point in exercising, he realized that physical activity became an important tool for him to cope with his emotions. The video shows how physical exercise helps him feel in control of his life again, overcome anger and stress, and also allows him to find new ways to communicate with others. Thomas doesn't just exercise, he begins to open up, he changes emotionally. Sport allows him not only to improve his physical fitness, but also to find peace in his emotions. He begins to pay attention to the little things, to moments of joy that he didn't notice before. He doesn't avoid pain, but learns to live with it. Thanks to regular training, he begins to notice how not only his body changes, but also his relationships with others. Sport helps him find a new purpose, as well as get closer to people who support him. This video is the story of how sport became a tool for emotional recovery, giving Thomas the opportunity to restore himself, gradually returning to life. After a few months of training, Thomas began to notice how his inner world changed. At first, sports were just a way for him to escape the pain, a way to escape thoughts about losing his father. But over time, he realized that sports brought him not only physical recovery, but also helped improve his emotional state. Thomas began to communicate more with his friends after training. This was an important step for him in restoring the social connections he had lost after his father left. At first, these were short conversations, but gradually their depth grew. They shared their achievements in training, joked, discussed plans for the future. Thomas began to understand how important it is to have friends and how sports can be a bridge to restoring these important connections. Thomas had always been a withdrawn boy who rarely opened up to others. After losing his father, he began to avoid communicating with friends altogether, withdrawing into his own world. His pain and disappointment overshadowed all other emotions. But with each workout, he began to feel stronger and more confident. At first, he exercised simply to relieve stress and calm his emotions, but over time, he noticed how it improved his relationships with his friends. Sport allowed him not only to improve his physical fitness, but also to regain his ability to communicate with others. Training became a topic of conversation after school. Thomas began to communicate more openly with his friends, discussing their joint achievements. They shared their impressions of training, gave each other advice, supported each other when someone felt tired or disappointed. This changed everything for Thomas. He felt that he was again part of something important, part of a team, and not just a lonely guy who felt isolated from the world. Support from friends and emotional recovery. Friends became an important support for Thomas. They not only helped him physically in training, but also became his emotional support. In a world where he had lost one of the closest people, sport and communication with friends began to occupy an important place in his life. With each training, Thomas began to feel more connected to reality, and not closed in his negative emotions. Sport allowed him not only to improve his physical fitness, but also to regain his ability to communicate with others. Training became a topic of conversation after school. Thomas began to communicate more openly with his friends, discussing their joint achievements. They shared their impressions of training, gave each other advice, supported each other when someone felt tired or disappointed. This changed everything for Thomas. He felt that he was again part of something important, part of a team, and not just a lonely guy who felt isolated from the world. Support from friends and emotional recovery. Friends became an important support for Thomas. They not only helped him physically in training, but also became his emotional support. In a world where he had lost one of the closest people, sport and communication with friends began to occupy an important place in his life. With each training, Thomas began to feel more connected to reality, and not closed in his negative emotions. Thomas began to understand that the changes in his physical condition were also beginning to be reflected on an emotional level. At first, he could not imagine how sports could help him cope with pain and anger, but now he saw how training helped not only with physical recovery, but also with psychological ones. Sports allowed him to develop not only physical strength, but also inner resilience. Every time he finished a workout, he felt relief, as if some of his stress and anxiety had remained in the gym. Gradually, Thomas became more collected, less withdrawn. Communicating with friends became easier, and sports became a kind of key to restoring the connections that he had missed so much. He understood that it was important to have support, and that true recovery is possible only through communication with people you value. Sports became the bridge that connected him to others and helped him overcome the pain of loss. With each workout, Thomas began to value himself more. At first it was just physical recovery, but over time he began to pay more attention to his emotions. He no longer saw sports as an escape from pain, but as part of his therapy, which helped him not only to become physically stronger, but also to recover psychologically. Through sports, he began to feel that he could take control of his life again. Thomas realized that although the pain had not disappeared, he could learn to live with it, not letting it define everything else. Sports became a tool for him not only to strengthen his body, but also for his psycho-emotional health. Every time he trained, he felt himself becoming more open to the world and to himself. He was not just regaining his physical shape, he began to reconnect with people and with himself. Thanks to regular training and the support of friends, Thomas began to find his way back to himself. He was no longer a withdrawn guy who hid from the world. Sports became an important tool for his emotional and physical recovery. Not only did he become stronger physically, but he also began to feel more confident and open. Communicating with friends became easy, and Thomas realized that in order to overcome pain, you need to give yourself the opportunity to change, find new opportunities for development, and not be afraid to ask for support. Thomas was not a shy boy, but after losing his father, he became more withdrawn. He stopped actively communicating with his friends and tried to stay away. But over time, he realized that it was important for him to restore the relationships that had been destroyed due to his isolation and loss of connection with the world around him. Sport became a way for him to open up again, so he decided to share this with his friends. Thomas began to recommend that his friends join the training. At first, they laughed at his suggestions, because many of them did not take sport seriously or did not have time. However, Thomas did not give up. He talked about how sports helped him feel better, reduce stress and increase energy. This became an important topic of conversation for him in their company. He began to share his experience, telling how each training session became for him not only physical, but also psychological recovery. Thomas understood that it was important for his friends to understand how sports help him overcome internal difficulties. He tried to explain that working out was a way for him to relieve stress and find balance in his life after his loss. He shared how important it was to have support and how it helped him start opening up to people again. Over time, his friends began to notice changes in Thomas. He became more energetic, outgoing, and less withdrawn. He began to laugh more, talk more, and talk about his achievements after working out. His friends noted that he looked physically stronger and more confident, and they began to ask how they could join him. Thomas didn't force them, but he began inviting them to work out. At first, he would just suggest going for a run or a class at the gym together. He didn't insist, but his persistence and positive changes began to affect his friends. One by one, they began to join him. At first, they took it as a normal activity, but gradually they noticed how their well-being improved and their emotions stabilized. They began to feel how sport affected their lives and became an integral part of their routine. Thomas was very happy when he saw that his friends were starting to discover sport and that this path was helping them not only physically but also psychologically. It was important for him that they felt the same changes that he himself had experienced. Moreover, he began to see how sport united them. After training, they would gather together to relax, discuss their achievements, and plan the next training sessions. Sport became not just a physical activity, but an opportunity for joint development and strengthening of friendships. Thomas realized that true strength lies not only in his own recovery, but also in helping others find their way. Training became for him not only a tool for achieving physical results, but also a way to inspire others, giving them the opportunity to change their lives, just as he had changed his. Since he had just begun his journey of physical and psychological transformation, Thomas has become not only stronger, but also wiser. Training together with friends changed his attitude towards life and himself. He was no longer a lonely guy facing the pain of loss. He became part of a friendly group that moved forward together, supporting each other every step of the way. Thomas felt that the changes that began with physical exercise led to deeper changes in his life. Sport became not only a way to stay in shape, but also an important part of his inner recovery, which helped not only him, but also his friends.